Thank you for joining us for another All Israel News Update. I'm Hanan Lishinsky, and today we want to look at the latest worrying developments in the relations between the US and Israel, two close allies usually, but there have been some worrying developments lately. And to be more exact, the worrying developments are really between the Biden administration and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. And they were kickstarted, those last developments were kickstarted by a very unusual video released by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just a few days ago. So Prime Minister Netanyahu in the last months has taken to communicate with the public and especially with the international audience by short video messages that he releases once in a while if he feels like he has something to say. This happened a few days ago when he released the video, at first addressing the US and at first thanking the US for its support, before then mentioning that he talked to Secretary Blinken recently and told him that the delays in the weapon shipments couldn't continue, it's unconscionable, before then telling the US, referring to British Prime Minister Churchill during the World War and telling the US that, like Churchill told the US then, he says now, give us the weapons and we will finish the job. So what Netanyahu did here was at first thanking the US for support before saying there has been no support for the past months. Ammunitions and weapon shipments have decreased drastically and it's time to pick up the pace again. Now, this is a highly unusual, it just has to be said, this is very unusual to put out a video like this publicly and basically humiliate the Biden administration, and this is exactly the way they took it. Now, privately, Israeli media reported that Netanyahu's closest advisors and confidants, like Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer, who was a US citizen himself in the past and then came to Israel, they told him that Netanyahu shouldn't do this, that this would be received very poorly by the US officials and the Biden administration, and this is exactly what happened. But according to these reports, Netanyahu then responded that he thought that there was no other way. He tried to address these matters privately with Blinken and Hochstein and other US officials who were here in recent months and also over the phone. And Netanyahu apparently felt that this was necessary and there was no other way. This latest move by Netanyahu has once again exposed him to criticism from inside Israel as well, from the opposition, who are saying that he's risking the US relationship without need, humiliating the Biden administration publicly, and endangering the critical US support at this time. Now, at first, the US reacted, as I mentioned earlier. We have reports from US media, Axios News, who reported that US officials they described their reactions as befuddled, perplexed, confused. They didn't understand where this was coming from. They were shocked at the ingratitude, are some of the quotes that were being reported. And immediately, Amos Hochstein, the US envoy dealing with the Lebanon issue, he met with Netanyahu just hours later and apparently berated him. Same with US Ambassador Jack Lew, US Ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew, who met Netanyahu later and scolded him apparently for his unprecedented video humiliating the Biden administration. But what happened just yesterday is that same Ambassador Jack Lew spoke in front of a conference here in Israel, and he basically acknowledged that Netanyahu was right. He said there were slowdowns on the shipments. He said there was no intentional holding back of shipments, but he said that shipments had slowed down and attributed this to bureaucracy and other processes that weren't intentionally halted. Jack Lew and other officials acknowledged that one shipment of 2,000-pound bombs was held, and this was back in a few months ago when the US was pressuring Israel not to enter Rafah and was fearing large civilian casualties, which haven't resulted from Israel's eventual incursion into Rafah. So the US is saying that only one shipment was halted and everything else was slowed down, which appears to indicate that Netanyahu was at least somewhat right on this. Now, all of this, of course, reflects very badly on the critical relationship between Israel and its greatest and most important ally, the US, who is supplying a lot of the weapons needed for this current war, and a lot of the weapons that will be needed for an eventual possible, probable war with Lebanon, which seems to be just on the horizon. Now, Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, is in the US at the moment, and he said yesterday that, or noted, stressed, that Israel's enemies are watching, and they're especially watching the relationship between Israel and the US. And if they're seeing daylight there, this could encourage all of Israel's enemy around it, and especially Iran, to increase its attacks and embolden them. So after the Rafah issue was a big bone of contention between Israel and the US, it appears that now the upcoming Lebanon war might be the next issue, the next difficult issue between the US and Israel, as the US pressures Israel not to escalate, which really isn't in the hands of Israel. Hezbollah has been the aggressor on this border since October 8th and continues to escalate and increase its attacks. But many in Israel are worried about what will happen if a war breaks out, and we're getting closer to the US elections, which many of you will of course know better than we do. And the Biden administration is coming under pressure from its left wing, which is anti-Israel. Parts of its left wing, are anti-Israel, and they're pressuring the US administration to reduce weapons shipments to Israel, just as we're getting closer to a war with Lebanon. So this is a critical moment. This is a very difficult moment in the relations, and Prime Minister Netanyahu will have to think very carefully about how to navigate this, how to navigate the support for the US, and how to say the things he needs to say in public so as to increase pressure on the US as far as he can without humiliating the Biden administration too much and possibly lead to a break between the countries. In this context, it is important to mention that Israel has made significant concessions since the whole Rafah issue a few months back, as I mentioned earlier. Israel has increased, as the US has requested, has increased aid into Rafah. It has created new transfer areas and border crossings from Israel into Gaza. It has, for example, also helped the US with its floating pier that now appears to have, the project appears to have failed. But Israel made great efforts to increase aid as the US requested. And this is also something that Jack Lew acknowledged yesterday during his speech, when he said that he acknowledged that there was a lot of aid that now entered Gaza and indicated that there was no famine in Gaza at the moment. Now, looking farther into the future, this whole issue of weapons shipments to Israel and Israel's dependence on foreign weapon shipments, especially from the US, will have large consequences for the country in the coming years. We reported on All Israel News a couple of times that there have been ongoing discussions and new efforts being made here in Israel to increase the local weapons production, to decrease dependence on arms shipments. Now, just a couple of days ago, for example, the Israeli Defense Ministry granted a license for the first time to an Israeli factory here in southern Israel, in fact, to produce some parts of munition fuses used for bombs and for other munitions. And this just goes to show that there will be an effort in the coming years to build more factories, to increase weapons production, to reduce the dependence on the US and on other countries. And the Israeli government will also have to find the right way to deal with this and not to humiliate the US in public or behind the scenes, while also reducing its dependence on weapons shipments from other countries. To continue reading about this issue, if you're more interested, you can go on allisrael.com or visit us on our other social media platforms. Thank you.